Whalen and Brandon Kravitz here. It is Wednesday morning. It's the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast, talking all things NBA, believe it or not. And we had a busier than usual, I should say, Tuesday night in the NBA. 9 games last night. We'll go through all of our takeaways there. I'm going to do my best to bite my tongue when it comes to the Milwaukee Bucks, who somehow lost on the road to the Washington Wizards last night. We'll talk Rockets, Timberwolves, Golden State. They got a win over Dallas. They're in good position now to fend off that frisky Houston Rockets team. We'll get into some surprises, some disappointments from the fantasy season as we go more big picture these next few weeks, and of course look ahead to the playoffs. Brandon, let's dive right in, man. As my good pal on the XM show, Jeff Erickson, would say, we got to rip off the Band-Aid when it comes to the Bucks. And Doc Rivers last night said. He called out the traveling party. He didn't even call out the team. He said, everybody that's with us, we're not taking these road games seriously enough. And these are the games, man. It's one thing for Milwaukee to come up short against Boston, to falter against some of these big opponents. Every team has their slip-ups. But, I was talking with my Bucks fan friends last night, and we were saying, like, these games just felt like they didn't happen to the Bucks in previous years when this team was such a juggernaut in the regular season. It felt like they would almost never be tripped up by a team as bad as the Washington Wizards. And granted, no Damian Lillard last night. I think there are some caveats if you really want to make some excuses. Malik Beasley went off 2 of 13 from the field, 1 of 10 from beyond the arc. He sunk both of my Prize Picks entries. I had Malik Beasley and Corey Kispert more on 6 made threes. Well, they combined for 28 attempts. 21 attempts, and only hit 5 of those. And I also had Malik Beasley over 13.5 points. So the usage was there as we expected. But I actually do think, I don't want to be like Malik Beasley's the reason they lost this game. But I do think Malik Beasley, they're expecting him to be their knockdown shooter. And I think it actually is a little bit underrated when you have a guy who you're feeding wide open looks throughout the game. And this has been something that's plagued Malik Beasley more often than not. It feels like since the All-Star break, especially, he's had these really down games. When you lose to a team like Washington by 4 points, it's pretty easy to imagine, like, hey, what if Malik Beasley just hit 2 or 3 more of those wide open threes? Maybe that game's different. With that said, it shouldn't come down to Malik Beasley making or missing 3-pointers when you're talking about the discrepancy between the Bucks and the Wizards right now.
Yeah, I blame the equipment guys. According to Doc Rivers, this is a team-wide issue, not just the players that are involved. He said he's been taking notes. I would love to take a look at that notepad. What exactly have you? Oh, okay. The equipment guy is laughing. Let me see if I could jot that down. I mean, clearly they have issues with depth, I think, is the biggest problem. And some of the names look the same, but the performances are not. And you get that sort of variance with role players. So you always have to stay on top of that aspect of team building. Maybe they missed Dante DiVincenzo a little bit too much, but Damian Lillard, I don't think saves the day necessarily. You got to be able to make hay without him, especially against the Wizards. This isn't Game 6 against Boston in the Eastern Conference Finals. It's the Wizards. They're terrible. They just don't have enough guys right now that they can depend on outside of Giannis. And teams have learned, they learn how to deal with great players. Giannis can't beat you by himself. And it's going to take a cast around him. He certainly did. And he put up huge numbers and was really good last night. But, he's not shooting threes. He's not helping to anchor that part of the game that is clearly lacking for this team. They've got problems. And I don't know if, they're kind of running out of runway here to fix those issues. And I don't think Damian Lillard alone is enough to really – I just don't feel good about them going into the playoffs. Point blank.
I agree. And I think a performance like last night to me is almost more concerning than, repeatedly coming up short against Boston, right? I think, there's kind of things you could poke holes in for each one of those Boston matchups and say, well, they were missing this guy, whatever. I think, having a slip up like this, these are the type of games that really make you wonder about their viability come the postseason. And, I think the other part of this is you look at the teams that Milwaukee is likely to face in round 1. And, with about 6 or 7 games remaining for most teams, it's highly, highly likely that they will face one of Indiana, Miami, or Philadelphia. And I don't think any of those are matchups that you love, right? And obviously, they have all this recent history with the Indiana Pacers. They've been a team that's had their number all year. We know Miami. I don't think we need to go into that. That's been a team that's given Milwaukee nightmares multiple times in the postseason. And then Philly, I actually think Milwaukee matches up fairly well with the Sixers, but it's not a round one matchup that you welcome, right? You don't want to face Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. And we saw Embiid, return last night. Certainly played more minutes than I expected. Philadelphia got the win over OKC. No SGA and no Jalen Williams. The good Jalen Williams, that is, for OKC last night. So, we do need to mention that. But Embiid played 29 minutes. The biggest thing that stood out to me is he seems like he's still being officiated in the old days of the NBA. 12 free throw attempts. He was getting the classic Embiid calls, some of the calls that feel like they've been legislated out of the game over the last couple of months. And, we could talk about Embiid and what he looked like and, what kind of runway he's going to have going into the playoffs. But right now, Milwaukee is not looking at a cakewalk. They don't have this like built-in ramp up here. You're not getting the Atlanta Hawks or the Chicago Bulls in round one where you have this ability to kind of figure things out on the fly. Like they're going to need to be locked in right away for round one.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that even goes for Boston. The difference is that we believe in Boston way more with how consistent and dominant they've been over the course of the regular season. But if Miami ends up at that 8th spot, you think Boston's not a little bit nervous? This is the team that ousted them last year.
You're right.
So they should be nervous, and they're good. And Milwaukee's not. They're not. I mean, they're good in like record wise, 47-28, really good. They are not as good as they are supposed to be, and they don't look like a team that would be impervious to a first round loss to any of these teams. Miami can turn it on at any moment. They did it last night. Philadelphia is it's almost like a mirage seeing them as the 8th seed. If Joel Embiid is healthy all year, are they any lower than 3 in the Eastern Conference? So you've got a 3 seed essentially sitting in the 8th spot right now. I think we would both agree the Bulls and the Hawks would be a miracle if they made it out of the play-in tournament because the teams that will be above them are so much better. Indiana, I mean, honestly, even though they haven't won a game against the Pacers yet this year, if I'm Milwaukee, I'm praying that I get the Indiana Pacers just based on who else I'd have to go up against.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the Pacers are the team that you want here. And again, the Pacers have given the Bucks plenty of trouble this season. I don't think that's a cakewalk by any means. Milwaukee last year, best record in the Eastern Conference, 58-24, lost in 5 games to the Miami Heat, right? So we've seen different variations of this. Milwaukee looked completely bulletproof last year. They still get tripped up in round one. Now they look significantly worse in the regular season, and you could absolutely see that happening again. I do think we forget, though, Giannis missed half of that series against Miami. It was a disaster. They still should have won the series. I get all that, but I think there are some caveats there. I texted my friends last night. I'm like, the Bucks have given me like no enjoyment this season. I was so hyped up for the Damian Lillard experience, and there's been some moments. It's not, I don't think Lillard is. I still think it's the right move. I think I still think you have to do that. I don't think there's any real regret there necessarily for Milwaukee, but this has not clicked at all in the way that we thought it would. Even when Lillard's been healthy, and I think he's missed only 9 games on the year. They're yet to really put together that dominant stretch where they've looked like this Milwaukee Bucks team of old, especially in the regular season. Am I writing them off? No. Do I still think they're the team that has the best chance to beat the Boston Celtics? Yes. But sitting here right now, coming off of a loss to the Washington Wizards, it's really, really tough to have faith in this team. Elsewhere last night, your Orlando Magic were not in action, so we get to jump around the league a little bit. Nuggets end up beating the Spurs in Denver. No Jamal Murray, by the way. He's missed 6 games in a row, which is a little concerning. I would imagine they're being cautious with him as the postseason approaches, but still something to keep an eye on. Jokic goes for 42, 16, and 6 with a steal and 2 blocks. Another just outrageous performance by Victor Wembanyama, who he did have 23 points on 29 shots. He was 2 of 11 from 3. I don't really care about that. I'm just glad that he's comfortable taking 11 3-pointers. I think that's generally a good thing for the Spurs. But he did add 15 rebounds, 8 assists, 9 blocks, including a couple on Jokic.
Yeah, it's amazing, too. I watched part of this game, and my eyes popped out of my head at least 15 times between the two of them, up and down the court. Jokic would do something amazing, and then Wembanyama would do something incredible on the other side, and then Wemby would block Jokic. I thought Wembanyama was doing a good job on Nikola Jokic, and this is how Jokic works. It looks like he's having a bad game sometimes, and then you're like, oh, he's got 40 points tonight. He's one of the few players that's able to pull. Usually, if a guy scores in that range, it looks like he's doing it. And Jokic just sort of like saunters his way to 40 points and 16 rebounds. But I mean, Wembanyama still has a lot of work to do. I think you see that. The stat line is incredible, and it shows what makes him special. But he got worked by Jokic last night more times than not. The block shots are nice. That's just one play. What doesn't show up in the box, or maybe it does because he had 42, was how often Jokic just got whatever he wanted against Wembanyama. Unless Wemby was standing right in front of him with his hand up, Jokic was working him throughout the course of the night. But look, you're dealing with right now, we're probably going to be the two best bigs, or at least the most skilled, most impressive in the NBA for the next 5 years. And we've got a lot of matchups between those two coming up. I cannot recommend it enough. Stop what you're doing. That's the NBA League Pass game. Anytime these two guys play against each other, they're just a joy to watch. But Wembanyama, don't let the stat line fool you. Jokic worked him, and I think he's got some work to do.
He does. But 9 blocks, man.
He's incredible.
He's been ridiculous, dude. I feel like we do this on every pod now, and it's mostly because I just love Wemby so much. But I also don't love the Wemby nickname, so I'm going to retract that. Wembanyama. I'm trying not to call him Wemby. I think we need a better nickname. I was telling this to Alex on Monday. Like, I don't think we've talked enough about Wembanyama not only living up to the hype, but in my opinion, vastly exceeding it, blowing it out of the water, both in terms of health, in terms of total games played, in terms of production, just in terms of how it looks, right? I mean, you think of the great rookie seasons, guys who've developed into some of the best players in the NBA. There's been a lot of great ones, right? But I think this is the best rookie season that I've seen. It's better than LeBron's. It's better than, Melo, who had a great rookie year, Durant, whoever else you want to throw on that list, at least in my lifetime. I'm not going to speak on anybody who debuted in the 70s or 80s or early 90s, but this has been ridiculously impressive from Wembanyama from start to finish. And you mentioned something that makes sense with Jokic, right? I think the best players in the NBA, that's something that's emblematic of those guys. When you reach a certain level, that even your bad games feel like good games. Giannis has been at that level. Jokic obviously has been there for several years now. You just don't really have bad games when you're like a top 5 player. And Wembanyama, 29 shots last night, wasn't effective. I get that. He's almost at that point for me now too, where it's like you kind of feel like he's struggling, and he's still putting up monster numbers even on his down nights.
Yeah, it just everything just comes so naturally to him, and the way that he gets his teammates involved keeps things open for him. I saw a pass that he made last night that, it's not going to be his biggest highlight reel pass, but it's such a good example of what makes him so dangerous. He was delivered the ball from the top of the key, and he passed it to the corner. I forget who it was, probably Porter. Before the ball was firmly in his hands, he was dishing it out to the corner. Yeah. You can't defend that. He knows where he wants to go before the ball gets to him, and then is able to make the pass quickly. There are not a lot of guys in the NBA that can do that decisively, that accurately, and that's what makes him special. So he's dangerous. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. What I would try to look up is Victor Wembanyama the biggest runaway rookie of the year that we have ever seen? And I wonder who else even compares in history. It's tough to pull that off the top of the dome like that, but I think just the point is there's probably not anybody in NBA history that pulled away the way that he has in his first season.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, I'm looking at the list right now, and somebody who jumps out to me pretty clearly is Chris Paul in 2005, 2006. Partially because that was not a fantastic draft. It was basically the Chris Paul draft. He got all but one first place vote. The other went to Darren Williams. Darren Williams actually finished 6th in the voting. So I don't know what happened there. That was probably a Utah voter. But that was like one of the biggest landslide rookie of the year votes that we've seen. And Chris Paul obviously was amazing right away as a rookie, right? I mean, in terms of the advanced metrics, like he was putting up like elite win shares, elite VORP, elite win shares per 48 right away. I'll give you one guess, by the way, who finished number 2 in rookie of the year voting that year. He was a then Toronto Raptor. I of course think of him as a Milwaukee Buck, but he bounced around for a while. Never somebody who sniffed like an all-star game or anything like that.
This was behind Chris Paul.
Yes. And I'll also give you another hint. He played at UConn.
I'm going to kick myself because there's I feel like I have a name on the tip of my tongue and I can't come up with it.
One last hint. He famously tweeted from the locker room in the early days of Twitter at halftime. Charlie Villanueva.
Damn it. Okay.
Charlie Villanueva, your 2006 Rookie of the Year runner-up. I think Luka, by the way, in 2019, that ended up being a landslide. He had 98 of 100 first place votes, but there was some Trae Young momentum, right? I mean, Trae started that season so poorly and played really well down the stretch. I mean, he got a couple of first place votes. Maybe that wasn't like a crazy landslide, but it was pretty clear by the end of that season that Luka was the guy.
Yeah, and that one makes sense. I don't know that. You look at some of the past names. You'd probably have to go back. Wilt Chamberlain. I'm thinking we were alive in the '60s, or that was actually in the '50s.
I remember that year.
I mean, like it was yesterday. Shaq in 92, 93 probably ran away with it back then. So not that a lot. I don't think a lot of people were betting Rookie of the Year futures.
Karl Anthony Towns in 2016. Swept it. He had every single first place vote. Porzingis was second. Jokic, ironically, was third. Obviously, that was not the Jokic that we know now. Jahlil Okafor got 34 second place votes to give you an indication of where the league was at that point. But you kind of forget. Like I remember, and they still do this. The annual NBA GM survey. There was like a 3 or 4 year period from like 2016 to 2019 where there's always that question of if you could start a team with any player in the league, who would it be? And I remember Cat being the resounding answer for a couple of years.
Yeah. How times have changed, but I mean, Cat's had himself a nice little year. I guess Victor Wembanyama is going to be the most common answer next year when they have this survey.
He's going to be the most common answer for several years, as long as he stays healthy. Right. I mean, I don't think there's an argument for anybody else. Right. I mean, and Jokic isn't that old, right? Doncic is still in his like early to mid 20s. Like there are other guys you could make a case for, but I don't see how it's not Victor Wembanyama. Rookie of the Year, by the way, has been off the board for over a week now at DraftKings. Like you can't even bet anybody else. It's going to Victor Wembanyama.
Yeah, you'd have to bet like $1,000 to win a penny at this point if they even put it back up, but they're not going to.
If you bet $100 million, maybe
you could win $10.
I'll be in Vegas later tonight. I'll invest.
There you go. Throw that $1. I'll Venmo you some cash. Yeah, I'll throw just one tiny little cup of water on the Wembanyama hype train just to keep things reasonable here, because I think you haven't, you're not off the rails here, but I think you've lost your faculties a little bit when it comes to Victor Wembanyama.
I'm not.
The one thing that I will say that we have not seen yet, and it is just year one, so I'm not panicked about it, but where I pause is it has not translated to anything yet. The stat line is tremendous.
Is he not a winning player?
I mean, right now, you can't say yes to that. I also don't blame him because the Spurs are terrible. I see you rolling your eyes. I'm not
LeBron
saying
missed the playoffs his first 2 years.
But LeBron won 35 games in his first season. And Victor Wembanyama is going to have to struggle to get to 20 this season. So that's my only hesitation is it looks great. And the stats, fantasy reality, fantasy wise, this is a slam dunk. There's nothing you could say to dock what he has done. But we haven't seen it translate into wins yet. That has to be the next step. Now, that's not all on him. Most of it's not. But he's such a unique player. Does that style translate to winning basketball? I'm not saying he's not a winning player. I'm saying that he can't be a winning player. I'm saying he's not yet, because look at the record. I mean, it speaks for itself. It's not like you said, he has exceeded the hype, which means he is doing amazing things, but those amazing things aren't turning into W's in the win-loss column.
Okay, first of all, LeBron had help, right? He had Ricky Davis. He had Zydrunas Ilgauskas. He had Carlos Boozer. None of those guys are playing for the Spurs. No, you're right. If you want to play devil's advocate, I get it. Wembanyama is 7th in defensive win shares. He is 20th in total win shares, which is actually higher than I would have guessed, to be honest. Wait, actually, no, that's not correct. He is 20th in VORP. I was looking at the wrong column. Win shares is tough when you're on a team that's winning like 16 games. You're just not going to pile up that many win shares. So that's part of how the stat works. But no, I think he's a winning player, dude. I don't see anything about Victor Wembanyama that's not a winning player. And to me, the passing is the biggest, I guess, surprise for me. We knew he could pass a little bit, but I mean, he's now routinely putting up these like 5, 6, 7, 8 assist games on a team that's terrible and blows a ton of assists for him on a nightly basis. Like he's not a Jokic level passer. Nobody is at that size, but he is well on his way to being one of the better passers, I think, at his position in the NBA for a long time. And I always say I don't think that's something you can learn. There's not a lot of guys who come in and, put up like 1 or 2 assists, and then 3 or 4 years later, all of a sudden they're averaging 7 assists. Like you just kind of have that or you don't. Anybody who's played basketball, you just kind of know it. You either have the vision or you don't. You can't really learn it. And I think he absolutely has that. Like not only, is he comfortable scoring from anywhere? I think he's, on his way to being the best defensive player in the NBA. I think he's really, really, really advanced as a passer for his age.
Yeah, there's a lot that he does really well. But like last night, they had a lead against, and the Denver Nuggets are so much better. So this is probably unfair. But look, I can only assess what we're watching in front of us. And the Spurs are bad. But they had a lead. They had an opportunity to kind of flex whatever muscle they have. And Wembanyama put up all these gaudy numbers, 9 blocks. He gave up 42 points to Nikola Jokic last night. This is one of the best defensive big men in the league. I know it's Jokic, but like still, this is, you put yourself in an opportunity to win a basketball game up against one of the most dominant big in the NBA. You put up the numbers and it didn't translate into anything. So that is the next hurdle for him to climb. And part of that's going to be having a better team around him. But I also want to see him actually make these numbers mean something. We see guys every single year in the NBA. We talk about them on this podcast. Guys that put up numbers. We love those players. Not everybody that puts up numbers translates to winning basketball games. He probably will be. I would bet that he becomes that, but right now you can't say that he is because it hasn't happened yet.
Okay, last thing I'll say on this, then we have to talk about some breaking news for the Charlotte Hornets.
Oh boy.
I think the league is so deep now that it's really tough. I mean, it's always been tough. There are very few rookies who put up great numbers and are also on a good team. That's just by virtue of having the number 1 pick, right? I mean, you typically go into a terrible roster. That's like most quarterbacks struggle early on in the NFL because you're on a bad team. I just think it's harder than ever to pile up wins. Like I'm surprised, by the way, that the Cavs won 35 games LeBron's rookie year. I did not know that. But the league was also terrible talent-wise, depth-wise in 2003 compared to where it is now. It's like, where do the wins come for this Spurs team, right? There's like 5 teams in the NBA where on any given night, you're like, yeah, I can see the Spurs winning this game. I mean, they're 8.5, 12.5 point dogs every single night because there's just not that many cupcakes.
Yeah, and I mean they've got to beef up their roster a little bit. I want to see what Wembanyama looks like when he plays next to at least one other player that you would consider to be at least in the consideration of an all-star vote midway through the season. It's unfair. It's unfair to judge him. I admit that, but we can only do what we can only assess what's in front of us right now. How does he play off of somebody else? Wembanyama has nobody to play off of. He plays his game and then hopes that the scrubs around him do well from 3. And that's about it. That's the game. And he didn't even have his full allotment of players. The Sohan didn't play last night, so.
Well, Sohan's done for the year.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, you're not going to get him again. It's all on Wembanyama. So the numbers are going to look great, but -9 in the box score, Nick. That has to count for something. By the way, we do have, I know this is not NBA related, but
I know what you're about to say. I am distraught. This is not good for the AFC South. I'll let you break the news.
Stephon Diggs was just traded to the Houston Texans. I know you had. I went looking for the Charlotte Hornets news, and I get this thrown in my face. Draft pick compensation is what Adam Schefter is reporting.
This is not what you want to see as a Jags fan. That's going to be a loaded offense.
They're like a super team all of a sudden.
I know, man. God. Damn it.
Wow.
You'll hear more about that on the RotoWire Fantasy Sports Today show on SiriusXM coming up in about an hour. But the Charlotte Hornets breaking news is that Steve Clifford will be stepping away after this season. He's still going to coach the final 7 games, so don't be alarmed. He'll be out there. It's going to be a nice little farewell tour for Steve Clifford. He's going to move into a front office role. Don't blame him. This has got to be a horrible team to coach. I would imagine he's just burned out at this point. But it makes sense, right? I think Steve Clifford, it's like when the Pistons brought in Dwayne Casey, and you're like, who do you think you are, right? Like, why are you bringing in Dwayne Casey to coach this roster? It's like Steve Clifford is kind of a mismatch with what the Hornets have going on right now.
Oh, absolutely. I lived that firsthand. My first year with the Magic was in 2018, so I got to know Cliff well. And then he was not in when they traded Vooch, Aaron Gordon, and Evan Fournier, even though it was the right move. And I think even at the time, most Magic fans could get on board with that because that team had a specific ceiling. But that was a playoff caliber team, even if it was the 8th seed. And that's what Steve Clifford was into. He wanted guys that were veterans, knew how to play the game, would lock in defensively. Aaron Gordon, look at the player he's become with Denver. Those are the guys that he wants to coach. The second they blew up the team, he and the management crew over in Orlando said they decided to part ways because Clifford didn't want to be part of the rebuild. They didn't fire him. That was his doing. So when you see things go south as quickly as they did in Charlotte, it doesn't surprise me at all that he doesn't want to be in on that. I just hope that he gets another opportunity because I think Steve Clifford is a really good coach. But what are you supposed to do with a Magic team that blows it up? You're not going to win there. And a Charlotte Hornets team that kind of forced to go into the tank again because of LaMelo Ball's injury.
All right, let's hit a couple questions from the chat here. Our guy Kenny says he's in finals week. Keon Ellis has been lacking. Do we hold or replace him? He's in a 9-cat, 10-team head-to-head league. He needs assists, steals, and blocks. He's got 2 ads left. On waivers as potential options, Chimezie Metu, Gigi Jackson, Jake LaRavia, Brandon Clarke, or Max Strus. Any of those names jump out to you?
Yeah, I mean, Keon Ellis had a couple of nice moments. All of these guys feel very similar to me as far as just not being able to rely on them night to night. But Gigi Jackson, I think, would be the one that I would go after. His role is so carved out with Memphis, and I think he's the toughest player they got right now. Points wise, rebounds. I think I would tend to lean in that direction for the full array of stats.
Yeah, I think
if Brandon Clarke got the minutes, I would go that route, but I don't know what they're doing with him.
Right. I mean, he just came back from a serious injury, and he's a veteran. They don't really have reason to push him. Grizzlies play tonight at Milwaukee. Then they play a back-to-back Friday, Saturday. So as Kenny notes in the chat, I think there's a decent chance Clarke sits one half of that back-to-back. So that probably eliminates him. I mean, again, in a points league, Gigi Jackson would be my answer. He's been super consistent. The minutes have been there, regardless of who's in, who's out with Bane and Jaren Jackson and those guys. He doesn't really give you much on defense. The assists have been okay, 2, 3, 4 per game, probably closer to like 2.5 on average. But if you specifically need defensive stats, I don't know if that's necessarily the play. Chimezie Metu in Detroit, yeah, he's going to give you the defensive stats. The minutes might be a little bit up and down. He's not really going to do a whole lot in terms of assists. Pistons play tonight at Atlanta. Then they have a back-to-back against Memphis and Brooklyn Friday, Saturday, which is a pretty appealing schedule.
Yeah, you got to like that.
Yeah.
Got to like that.
I actually think that might be the move. And, with Detroit, again, it's going to be unpredictable. You never know who's going to be in or out. But, they already put out that, Cade Cunningham might take a rest day tonight. Wouldn't be shocked if they did the same thing with Jalen Duren, although, he's been out there when healthy. But, yeah, we're at the point in the year where we're telling you to go pick up Chimezie Metu. Christian says, good morning, fellas. Good morning, Christian. Thoughts on dropping Brandon Miller for PJ Washington? I'm in the championship, and I'm worried about Miller missing time or being shut down. So both of these teams are on a 4-game week. Charlotte has 3 remaining games. They play Portland, Orlando, OKC. No back-to-backs this week. So, I don't know. Brandon Miller's been insulated thus far from any rest, right? Like the only games he's missed are when he's been hurt. He is questionable for tonight with an ankle sprain. So keep an eye on that. But in terms of just evaluating these guys straight up, Washington has 3 games left. Atlanta, Atlanta, Golden State, and Houston are the 3 remaining opponents for Dallas. Mavs still have plenty to play for, right? I think that's the big difference here is that Dallas is sitting in the 5, but they're tied currently with the Pelicans who are in 6th. They are only up one game on Sacramento and Phoenix, so they need to keep winning to avoid falling into the play-in zone. I think if you're worried about the security, if you have any concern about Brandon Miller missing time, whether it's tonight or beyond tonight, I would just go PJ Washington.
Yeah, I'm not buying into PJ Washington's a fine option and will probably give you better. Will definitely give you better defensive stats if you're looking for that. But I'm not really trying to move off of Brandon Miller, and I think if they were going to shut him down, they would have done it already. Mm-hmm. Why do it now?
Kenny also notes that Wendell Carter Jr. is on waivers, but he said it feels like a trap coming off of back-to-back big games. What say you?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Let me refresh myself here with the schedule. You would think that I have this stuff off the top. Oh yeah, that's right. It is a trap. That's Memphis and Portland, people. Of course he's going to have big games. He's going up against Valanciunas tonight. That's not going to be easy. And then, he's Charlotte and Chicago. He could have he'll have a couple of nice games in the next 4, but probably not going to do much tonight. And you're right. I think you're thinking along the right path here, and that it's probably a trap.
All right, let's talk a little bit about some surprises and disappointments from this season. Keep throwing questions in the chat, guys. If your fantasy league is still going, we're happy to give you any advice over the next 10, 15 minutes here before we head out. We talked a little bit about this on Monday, guys who Alex and I talked about it more in a team context, as far as which teams have been disappointing. On our show on NBA radio, we hit the teams that are either going way over or way under their win totals, but I want to dig in on some individual players, and we'll start with the disappointments. And I do want to throw out, injuries. That happens. So I'm not going to say, obviously LaMelo Ball, massive disappointment, but there's a reason for that. Jaren Jackson to me he hasn't really been injured, but the Grizzlies season just fell apart in such a disastrous way that you couldn't really expect him to produce in the way that we expected. But the guys who are top of mind for me, Mikal Bridges, Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler for sure. Jordan Poole, although he is the 70th ranked player in total value in 8-cat, he hasn't been quite as bad lately, and he barely has missed any time. So if you actually held on to Jordan Poole, it hasn't been as bad as you might think. I think Scoot Henderson has to be on that list as well. And I know a lot of people, and I was telling people just don't draft Scoot because rookie guards aren't that good. That's one of my few victory laps I could take this season. But it's been worse. It's been a lot worse, I think, than we expected, especially with the opportunity that he's had in Portland. Yeah. My take on Scoot Henderson, he should have stuck with the name Scooter. Do you remember when he was going by Scooter? Like SCOOTA? Go search, go read about him, find an article from 2021. He was Scooter. That's what he was listed at as 247 as a recruit, and now he's Scoot.
So you think that would have helped his field goal? I think that's a cooler name. Do you think that would have helped his field goal percentage?
I think it would have helped his field goal percentage. I think it would have cut down on the turnovers.
Yeah, I got a good up close and personal view of Scoot Henderson the other day at the Kia Center for Magic Blazers, and he is a roller coaster ride of a basketball player. Super exciting to watch. Flies up and down the court. Looks like he got shot out of a cannon. That guy cannot shoot, and he is the only one on the team that has not figured that out. DeAndre Ayton at one point passed him the basketball, and I swear looked at him and just shook his head before Scoot even jacked up. An ill-advised, wide-open 3 that clanked off the backboard. And he just knew, I have to pass this because you're open, and this isn't going to go well. I think he's an exciting player, but he's got to figure out what his range is because he is blissfully unaware of that right now. But he's definitely on the list, and unlike you, I bought in before the season. I thought we were going to get a mini Russell Westbrook, and
well, we kind of did.
I got dollar store Westbrook is what I got.
Yeah, we got Lakers Westbrook.
Exactly. So I think that you nailed a few. You nailed a lot of the right names there. I think Jaren Jackson Jr. is an interesting one because I can't tell if it's on him or not. He has not had a good season,
right?
But the Memphis Grizzlies haven't been anything close to what they were supposed to be because of the injuries that they've dealt with. So is it circumstantial or is he tailing off as a player? That's going to be one of those interesting things to think about. Where do you fall on that thought?
I think it's circumstantial. I overpaid for him in an important auction league, so like I feel like I'm a little jaded on Triple J. And the way I constructed my team in that league was, all right, I'm going to dominate blocks. Like I got Gobert for what I thought was a really good price. It ended up being a great price because he stayed healthy and he's played pretty well this season. But the way I built my team was like, all right, I'm penciling in like at least 2.5 blocks per game out of Jaren Jackson. And that to me is what stands out. Is like his scoring is up like 4 points per game. The field goal percentage isn't as bad as you'd think. Like he was a 51% shooter last year. That's not really who he's been, throughout his career. He actually doesn't shoot a great percentage for a big man. 44% to me is fine. Like the free throw percentage is up compared to last season. The free throw rate is way up. His steals production is up. His assists are up. The rebounds are about what you'd expect. But the lack of shot blocking to me that's the singular big disappointment with Jaren Jackson, because you thought you'd be getting, some of those like 5-6 block games every now and then. And, obviously, Morant, Bane, Smart, all those guys missing time just kind of washed out this season. I think Steven Adams being out of the lineup is huge, specifically for Jaren Jackson, because you watch these games and like Jaren Jackson's not operating the way that he was last year when Steven Adams was healthy for most of the year, right? Like he can't really play his like shot blocking specialist role with the way that this roster ended up shaking out.
You would think that he would have just gone into SWAT mode, but yeah, he just finds himself out of position. I don't think he looks right, but I'm willing to kind of just let this season be a complete wash and see if they're able to bounce back and get back to what they were. This is a team that we thought was going to be able to take over the Western Conference for a couple of years, or at least be one of those perennial contenders. Are they able to bounce back to that when they get their allotment of guys, or has that time passed? So most likely they'll be fine, but won't know it till we see it. I would say I would throw another name out there. What about Trae Young? Trae Young is a guy that was drafted in that top 15 range, and if we were redrafting with what we know now, I don't think he still goes. I don't think he still goes that high.
I think with Trae, it's just the injury, right? So it's bad luck. I mean, he was the 11th ranked fantasy player per game, and still is this season. So I actually think he's returned value. I mean, he was fantastic, right? I mean, he was leading the league in assists. He's had almost 11 per game, giving you 1.5 steals, 26 points, over 3 threes per game. I actually would disagree. I think before the injury, he was living up to the hype. He was somebody that I would have preferred to take over Jaren Jackson. If you're picking 11th or 12th or early in the second round, I think he makes a lot of sense. Like I actually think fantasy wise, obviously it's been a weird, disappointing year for Atlanta as a team. But Trae Young, the fantasy player, I think before the injury was right where you'd expect, and maybe even a little above that.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit jaded by what their season has become. But yeah, numbers wise, when he was out on the court, just not he's dealt with his injuries in the past, but it feels like it's really starting to pile up. You could point the way of another trailblazer, and that's an easy thing to do. DeAndre Ayton.
I have really entire Trailblazers roster on my list.
Yeah, they're really, because Anthony Simons is somebody that people invested in. Yep. I was high on Shadon Sharp coming into the season. None of these, there wasn't really anybody. Malcolm Brogdon returned some value for a minute, but that, and then you end up getting like the waiver wire guys. So how many different questions have we gotten about Duop Reith? But in terms of guys, that you spent, Delano Banton, by the way, that guy can play. I like him.
He's kind of good. Yeah.
I think he's gonna be on the Blazers for years to come.
He is a quintessential Blazer. I feel like he's a fan favorite type of guy, right? He's bounced around a little bit, but I do feel like he has found a home there. A couple of guards that I'll throw out there. Darius Garland. I know he's had injuries, as has been the case the last few years, but I mean, in some leagues he was being drafted inside the top 40, often inside the top 45 or 50. And even when he's been out there, he's been like the 70 to 75th best player per game. Like that's been really disappointing. I do think there's a very good chance Donovan Mitchell is somewhere else next season. So,
and I would add Donovan Mitchell. I would add Donovan Mitchell to the list. He is on a per game basis not as disappointing as Darius Garland, but his availability has been spotty at best. And this is a slightly down year from what he's done the last couple.
Per game wise, he's number 7 player in ACAT. So like he's like Trae Young to me, where it's like, he's played 51 games. That's super disappointing. But when he's been out there, he's been a machine. So it depends how much you factor injuries into the equation when you're talking about a true disappointment. What about Stephen Curry? A little disappointing. Guy who's still going in round one in most drafts. He ranks about 25 right now on the year in per game value. Still giving you a huge advantage in threes. And in category leagues, that's the big thing, right? You're getting almost 5 threes a game out of Curry. Still getting 26 points, but the assists are down. He's not really giving you anything in terms of steals, field goal percentage under 45%. Still a lot to like. We're poking holes in an elite player here, but I wouldn't say it's been a slam dunk year here for Steph.
Not his best. I think it's sort of opposite from what we've talked about with Trae Young and Donovan Mitchell, and I'm docking these guys for not being available. Steph Curry has been available, so you're getting a slightly lesser version of what Steph has been over the course of his career, but you're getting him. You get to keep him in your lineup, and to me, availability is one of the best abilities, and so I'm not overly disappointed. I think at this point in his career, you got to expect a little bit of a drop off if you draft him. 36 years old. I mean, trees don't grow to the sky.
I will say overall, general health of injury-prone veterans has been one of my positive surprises this season.
Big time.
Like, I was off LeBron. I was off Kawhi. I was off Kevin Durant. I think even like Chet Holmgren and Victor Wembanyama, there are major questions about how many games those guys would play. Chet, you forget, obviously is not a true rookie. He missed his entire rookie year with a serious foot injury. He's been extremely healthy. I think he's only missed like 1 or 2 games. Wembanyama's barely missed time. You could throw Paul George into that equation. Anthony Davis obviously has missed like 4 games all year. So we've had players like Trae Young, like Donovan Mitchell, like LaMelo Ball who've sunk your season, but the guys who we thought would play like 55 games for the most part have not.
And that's why I'm curious where the conversation went between you and Alex in regards to the team side of things, because we've seen a lot of those key veterans stay healthy this year. We haven't really had massive disappointments. I think outside of the Memphis Grizzlies, an obvious one that their season hasn't looked anything like what we thought. But outside of that, who's really that disappointing? And I think a large part of there being not that many disappointments in the NBA, the teams that are bad are the teams that we largely expected to be bad, and that's because the best players in the league have stayed healthy this season.
Yeah, you're correct about that. I think, Memphis is the obvious one, and I wouldn't even call it a disappointment. It was just horrific injury luck. I mean, that's about as bad as we've seen in recent memory. I think, some people would say the Lakers, but I mean, they're on like a 47-win pace, right? I mean, they're basically they're probably going to fall short of hitting their win total, which was 47.5, but they're 10 games above 500. And I think the fact that they've stayed healthy and they're not going to hit that win total, you would say, yeah, maybe that's a disappointment, with as many games as they've gotten out of LeBron and AD. But most of the teams ahead of them have also stayed healthy, right? I mean, I think that I say it all the time. There's so much depth and so much elite talent in the NBA. It's like, it's hard to look at the Lakers and say, yeah, man, they should be up in second place right now. They're so much better than Minnesota or OKC or the Clippers or the Mavs. It's like those teams all have plenty of elite talent in their own right. I think Golden State, that was one team we both agreed on. They have 41 wins. It's been disappointing. Milwaukee feels like you're splitting hairs, for a team that's sitting in second in the East. It's been disappointing, man. They're going to fall way short of their win total. I think the really bad teams have been worse than we expected. Like all of Charlotte, Washington, Detroit, Portland, San Antonio, all of those teams are going to go way under their projected win total. Charlotte's win total was 31.5. And I don't think they hit that with LaMelo. It's a big, obviously not having him is huge. You want to talk about a guy who we don't know if he's a winning player. I think LaMelo's on that list. So yeah,
he's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. That guy put up numbers left and right.
Yeah, the bad teams being disasters as opposed to just being bad teams. That to me has been one of the disappointments.
And part of the reason, though, if you want to let them off the hook a little bit, is that the good teams have been as good as we expected them to be, to the point where the Golden State Warriors are sitting in 10th in the Western Conference, and you can't confidently tell me they're not going to make a deep run in the playoffs. We just don't know. Now, they've been disappointing as far as the overall record, but you still enter the postseason going, yeah, they can make a run. And you're saying that about the team that's the last spot in the Western Conference. So if everybody's staying healthy and the teams that we expected to be decent, the teams we expected to take a step forward, like the Magic, we expected the Magic to be better. There are a couple of wins better than even the most optimistic person would have thought, but still pretty much in line with what people thought. And so that's going to keep everybody else down a little bit. But this is part of the reason why I knock Victor Wembanyama. as great as he has been, the Spurs are worse than we thought they would be, which means that is part of his year one resume.
All right, man. We're
I
at
know you can't do it.
mark.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, you're cutting me off. You're cutting me off because I'm slandering your guy.
Look, man, I gotta go eat. I gotta get ready to talk Stephon Diggs on the radio. I'm depressed about what this means for the Jags and for the AFC South. But go check us out, RotoWire Fantasy Sports today on Fantasy Sports Radio channel 87. We're there Monday through Friday, 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern. Brandon, I'm out the rest of the week on the NBA show, so we'll have Joe Bartle stepping in with Alex Barutha. I'll be back with you next Wednesday. Looking forward to it. We'll give you a full Vegas recap. What went right, what went wrong at the tables. Probably a lot more is going to be going wrong than right. But looking forward to it, man. I got 72 holes on the books over these next few days out there. So should be a good time, and appreciate you doing this as always. We'll check in next week.